Imagine the skies over Europe, filled with hundreds of German fighter planes, engines roaring, bombs primed, in a desperate attempt to turn the tide of a war already lost. It was January 1, 1945, a day that would mark the Luftwaffe's last gamble. An audacious strike that aimed to cripple Allied air power, but would instead seal its fate. Hello and welcome to the channel. Today, we dive deep into Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's final, bold strike during the closing months of World War II, a mission filled with bravery, chaos, and tragedy. By the end of 1944, the Luftwaffe, once the dominant air force of Europe, had been decimated by relentless Allied bombing campaigns and severe fuel shortages. The Allies' overwhelming control of the skies meant that Germany's air units were severely outnumbered and under-equipped. Yet, in the midst of this desperate situation, High Command hatched Operation Bodenplatte. Baseplate. A massive, coordinated attack designed to destroy Allied aircraft on the ground in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The goal was clear: cripple Allied air power during the Battle of the Bulge, and give the Wehrmacht a fighting chance. The interior of the Luftwaffe's command was tense. Pilots and officers knew the operation carried immense risk. Many of Germany's best, trained pilots had been lost on the Eastern Front, replaced by young, inexperienced flyers thrust into a mission where the odds were almost certainly against them. In heated briefings, commanders emphasized precision and secrecy. The attack had to be a surprise. If discovered beforehand, the Luftwaffe units would be annihilated in the open airfields. Maps were scrutinized, flight paths memorized, and timing rehearsed to the minute. These men were going into a mission that they knew could be their last. Outside, the Allied airfields were bustling hubs of activity. Aircraft of all types, fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance planes, were stationed at the numerous bases in Belgium and the Netherlands. Ground crews were performing maintenance, pilots were briefed for morning sorties, and anti-aircraft defenses were on high alert. Yet, the Allies had grown confident. For months, the Luftwaffe had been unable to mount a major offensive. This overconfidence would soon be exploited by Germany's last desperate maneuver. At first light on January 1, over 900 German aircraft took to the skies. From the interior perspective of the Luftwaffe cockpit, the pilots felt a mix of excitement and dread. The sky was cold, visibility low, but determination ran high. Radio silence was maintained to preserve the element of surprise. The planes flew in tight formations, low over the terrain, attempting to avoid Allied radar and observation posts. Every flak battery avoided, every obstacle negotiated, brought them closer to the target. The exterior view, meanwhile, was a sudden nightmare for the unsuspecting Allied forces. The first German fighters descended upon the airfields with devastating accuracy. Explosions rocked the tarmac as bombs and strafing runs destroyed dozens of aircraft in minutes. Chaos erupted on the ground. Pilots scrambled to take off. Anti-aircraft crews returned fire, and personnel sought cover from the sudden and violent assault. The operation initially appeared to be a tactical success, as several key airfields suffered heavy losses. However, the interior calculations of the German command were grim. Fuel shortages. There was little margin for error, and navigation mistakes began to take their toll. Some squadrons overshot their targets, entering heavily defended zones. Others collided with terrain or were shot down by alert, Allied fighters. Communication breakdowns meant that coordination faltered, turning the mission into a fragmented, deadly scramble. The Luftwaffe's internal confidence began to crack, replaced by fear and chaos. By mid-morning, the reality of Operation Bodenplatte became clear. While German pilots had inflicted significant damage, the losses they sustained were catastrophic. The Luftwaffe lost hundreds of aircraft, the very planes they could not replace, and many of their remaining veteran pilots were killed or captured. On the Allied side, losses were substantial, but quickly recoverable. Aircraft were replaced, airfields rebuilt, and the men continued fighting. For Germany, the operation was a Pyrrhic victory at best, but more accurately, a strategic disaster that accelerated the Luftwaffe's collapse. The interior stories of the pilots were tragic. Young flyers who had trained for months, some even days, found themselves facing a deadly hail of flak and gunfire. Veteran leaders tried to rally their units, guiding them to targets and back through hostile skies, yet many would not return. In memoirs and later interviews, survivors described the surreal horror, the roar of engines, the flash of explosions, the sight of comrades falling from the sky, and the bitter knowledge that their nation was losing a war it could no longer win. On the exterior, the aftermath of Bodenplatte was stark. Airfields were littered with wreckage, burned out fuselages, shattered wings, and abandoned equipment marked the landscape. Yet, unlike Germany, the Allies could replace both men and material. The mission did not delay their advance, it could not change the outcome of the war. Bodenplatte stands in history as a last, desperate gamble, illustrating both the bravery of its pilots and the futility of Germany's final efforts in the sky. As the first wave of Luftwaffe fighters descended on Allied airfields, the scene became a whirlwind of violence and confusion. From the interior perspective of the German cockpit, pilots navigated at dangerously low altitudes to avoid radar, the ground rushing beneath them in a blur. Adrenaline surged, eyes scanning for anti-aircraft fire, friendly units, and the targets below. Every split second mattered. A single mistake could mean death. The pilots understood the enormity of the operation. It was not only their lives at stake but the fate of the Luftwaffe itself. On the ground, the exterior view was one of total chaos. Airfields that had been hubs of Allied efficiency mere moments before were now engulfed in fire and smoke. B-17s, Spitfires, and P-51 Mustangs were strafed or destroyed on the tarmac. Explosions tore through hangars, fuel depots, and maintenance areas. Personnel ran for cover, some firing back with whatever weapons were at hand. The sudden ferocity of the attack left many unprepared. Some units had only minutes to respond. The shock of seeing enemy aircraft flying low and fast created a sense of disbelief, as if the war had suddenly shifted. Inside the Luftwaffe formation, miscommunications began to emerge. Some units had trouble finding their assigned airfields. Navigational errors, combined with poor weather and the low visibility of winter dawn, caused squadrons to scatter. This interior breakdown meant that while some airfields were attacked with brutal effectiveness, others saw minimal damage. For those pilots who reached their targets, the intensity of the attack was almost cinematic. Bursts of anti-aircraft fire lighting up the sky, bombs exploding in showers of fire, and enemy fighters swooping to intercept. Every pilot had to make split-second decisions, balancing aggression with survival. Despite these challenges, acts of heroism and skill were apparent. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots executed daring strafing runs, avoiding flak while scoring direct hits on Allied aircraft. One account tells of a pilot who, after his wingman was shot down, pressed on alone to destroy a fuel depot, understanding that every plane he took out could delay the Allied advance. The interior perspective of these flyers was a mix of fear, determination, and grim duty. They knew that success would not guarantee survival, yet their training and discipline drove them forward. From the exterior, the human cost was visible in full measure. Ground crews, caught in the sudden onslaught, were forced to fight or flee. Some tried to man anti-aircraft guns, others scrambled to save aircraft. Smoke and fire consumed equipment, and the sound of exploding bombs and machine guns created an atmosphere of pandemonium. Yet, Allied response was swift. Fighter aircraft on patrol quickly engaged the attackers, turning the sky into a deadly ballet of pursuit and evasion. What had begun as a surprise attack began to transform into a brutal contest of attrition. Within the Luftwaffe, losses began to mount rapidly. Pilots were shot down, planes collided in the confusion, and fuel shortages prevented safe returns. The interior narrative of the operation shifted from hope to desperation. Experienced leaders tried to maintain cohesion, but fragmented groups faced overwhelming Allied firepower. Despite this, some German pilots managed remarkable feats bombing key targets, returning with their aircraft riddled with bullets, and guiding disoriented comrades to safety. These individual acts stand out as testaments to skill and courage under impossible conditions. On the exterior, the operation's impact was mixed. Several airfields suffered significant damage, temporarily reducing Allied sortie capability. But the broader strategic effect was minimal. The Allies quickly assessed losses, repaired damaged airfields, and replaced destroyed aircraft with reserves. Bodenplatte, which had required meticulous planning and immense risk, could not shift the overall momentum of the war. The tactical gains were short-lived. While German losses were permanent and irrecoverable, the interior perspective of German commanders in the aftermath was stark. Pilots who survived returned to base, many wounded or exhausted. Accounts from officers reveal a bitter understanding. While the operation had demonstrated daring and tactical skill, it had also depleted the Luftwaffe's remaining strength. Veteran airmen, whose loss would be felt across the German front, were gone, and replacements were largely untrained. The final strike had exhausted the Luftwaffe's last reserves in an attempt to regain air superiority. Externally, the visual aftermath reinforced the futility of the mission. Burned-out aircraft, smoking craters on airfields, and shattered hangars were evident to Allied reconnaissance. Yet they could be repaired. The operation showcased the bravery of German airmen, but also the inevitability of the Luftwaffe's decline. It was a stark lesson in the limits of desperation against overwhelming material and logistical superiority. By the end of the day, the Luftwaffe had flown its final major offensive in the West. The interior narratives of pilots ranged from pride to despair. They had struck hard, shown remarkable skill, but ultimately paid an unbearable price. From the exterior perspective, history recorded Bodenplatte as a bold but doomed strike. A fleeting moment of tactical brilliance overshadowed by strategic collapse. For the Allies, it was an alarming episode, but one they could endure. For Germany, it marked the last gasp of a once formidable air force. As the smoke cleared over the shattered airfields, the full scope of Operation Bodenplatte became painfully evident. From the interior perspective of German command, the mission was a harsh lesson in the limits of desperation. The losses of experienced pilots were irreplaceable, aircraft destroyed could not be replenished, and morale, though initially high among the surviving units, began to sink under the weight of futility. Many Luftwaffe veterans realized that this operation, while bold, had only accelerated the collapse of their air force. In essence, the mission had been a gamble too far, and the house of cards that had once been Germany's air power was crumbling irreversibly. The exterior view was strikingly different. The Allies, though shaken by the sudden ferocity of the attack, quickly regained control. Within days, repair crews rebuilt damaged airstrips, replacement aircraft arrived, and flight operations resumed. The operation had inflicted localized damage but had failed to achieve any strategic reversal. From the air above, the destruction appeared: dramatic smoldering wrecks, blackened craters, twisted metal. A stark reminder of war's violence. Yet the larger picture remained unchanged. The Allies retained air superiority and continued their advance into German-held territory. Within Germany, the morale of the Luftwaffe suffered a profound blow. Survivors returned to bases in silence, haunted by the loss of comrades and the realization that the war was effectively lost. In letters and later memoirs, pilots recounted the tension before the operation, the fear and exhilaration during the attack, and the deep despair after its failure. The interior perspective highlights a human side, often overshadowed by statistics. Young men, trained to fight against overwhelming odds, facing the dual horrors of combat and the knowledge of inevitable defeat. Many of these pilots had grown up in the propaganda-fueled confidence of the Luftwaffe's early years, and now, that world had crumbled around them. Externally, historians would later assess Bodenplatte as a tactical demonstration of skill, but a strategic disaster. While the operation temporarily damaged several Allied airfields and destroyed aircraft, it did not halt the Allied advance in the Ardennes, or reverse the trajectory of the war. The Luftwaffe, stripped of much of its veteran corps, would never again mount a coordinated offensive of similar scale. Allied forces, on the other hand, continued to push forward, their logistical and numerical advantages rendering the Luftwaffe's sacrifice tragic, but ultimately inconsequential, in the broader context of the conflict. The interior stories of heroism persisted even amid failure. Pilots who returned with severely damaged planes were celebrated for skill and bravery. Some guided injured comrades back to base, others fought their way through heavy enemy fire to strike valuable targets. These acts underscored the skill and courage that remained in the Luftwaffe, even as the war neared its end. Yet, the human cost was heavy. Each plane lost, each experienced pilot killed, weakened the Luftwaffe permanently. What had been a show of daring became a bitter symbol of futility. A last flash of brilliance overshadowed by the inevitability of defeat. From the exterior, the broader lessons of Operation Bodenplatte are clear. The operation highlighted both the possibilities and limits of air power. Precision, planning, and skill could achieve temporary tactical success, but without material resources, fuel, and trained personnel, even the most audacious strike could not alter strategic outcomes. Bodenplatte is often cited in military studies as an example of a last desperate offensive, where courage met impossibility. For the Allies, it underscored the importance of resilience, rapid repair, and superior logistics in sustaining air operations. The legacy of Bodenplatte extends beyond the tactical and strategic. It serves as a symbol of the Luftwaffe's final stand, capturing the duality of bravery and futility in war. From the interior view, it remains a tale of human courage, discipline, and sacrifice against impossible odds. From the exterior, it represents the tragic consequences of a nation attempting to reverse a lost war through audacious but unsustainable means. Today, historians, aviation enthusiasts, and military scholars continue to study Bodenplatte, not only for its operational details but also for its profound human and historical significance. In the end, Operation Bodenplatte was more than an air raid. It was the Luftwaffe's swan song, a final, desperate gamble to regain control of the skies, undertaken by men who knew the odds were stacked against them. Though they struck with precision, courage, and determination, the outcome was inevitable. The airfields were damaged, lives were lost, and aircraft destroyed, but the strategic balance of the war remained unchanged. The mission stands as a testament to both human bravery and the cruel realities of war, illustrating how even the most daring plans can falter against overwhelming odds. History remembers Operation Bodenplatte as the last great offensive of Luftwaffe, a bold, desperate, and ultimately tragic chapter in the story of World War II's air battles. The skies of January 1, 1945, remain etched in memory, a moment when courage collided with futility, leaving a legacy of heroism shadowed by loss. For those who study the war, Bodenplatte offers lessons in strategy, logistics, human endurance, and the harsh truth that no level of audacity can compensate for material and numerical inferiority.